The exploration vessel Curiosity's Edge had been drifting through the void for 3 months when it stumbled into what would later be called the most significant moment in galactic history. Captain Sarah Chen was reviewing stellar cartography data in her quarters when the proximity alarms shattered the ship's peaceful hum. "Captain, to the bridge!" came the urgent voice of her first officer, Commander Torres. Sarah's bare feet hit the cold deck plating as she grabbed her uniform jacket, muscle memory from 2 decades of naval service guiding her through the familiar motions of crisis response. The bridge of the Curiosity's Edge buzzed with controlled tension. Through the main view screen, Sarah saw what had triggered their alarms. A fleet of ships unlike anything in Earth's databases. The vessels were organic-looking, their hulls seeming to pulse with bioluminescent veins that shifted through the color spectrum. They moved in perfect synchronization, like a school of deep-sea creatures navigating an alien current. "First contact protocols," Sarah ordered, settling into her command chair. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency despite the historic nature of the moment. Lieutenant Kim at Communications was already adjusting frequencies, searching for any recognizable patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum that might indicate attempts at communication. What they didn't know was that aboard the lead Corvin bioship, Hive Commander Zelfak was experiencing something unprecedented in the Empire's 10,000-year history. Confusion. The Corvin collective consciousness, a shared mind spanning billions of individuals across hundreds of worlds, had never encountered a species that registered as completely blank in their psychic network. Analysis suggests primitive technology, reported Sub-Commander Vent through the mental link that connected all Corvin minds. Single vessel, approximately 200 biological entities aboard. Metal-based construction with chemical propulsion systems. Zelfak's chitinous features tightened in what humans might have recognized as a frown. Yet they traverse interstellar space. Curious. Standard protocols: approach, assess, assimilate or eliminate based on potential value to the Empire. On the Curiosity's Edge, Sarah watched the alien fleet maneuver into what any military mind would recognize as an attack formation. "Shields up, weapons to ready status but do not target. We're here to explore, not start an interstellar war." "Captain," called out Dr. Pasha. Yuki Tanaka from the science station, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from their lead ship. Whatever they're powering up, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered." The communication board suddenly erupted in a cascade of lights and sounds. Lieutenant Kim's hands flew over her controls as she tried to make sense of the incoming signals. "Captain, I'm receiving. This is impossible. I'm receiving signals in standard Earth languages. English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic. They're speaking to us in our own languages." Sarah's blood chilled. "Put it on speakers." The bridge filled with a voice that seemed to come from multiple sources at once, harmonizing in an unsettling way that made several crew members visibly uncomfortable. "Primitive vessel of unknown origin. You have entered sovereign space of the Corvin Empire. Prepare for assessment and absorption into our collective consciousness. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Dr. Tanaka looked up from her readings, her face pale. "Captain, they're not just scanning our ship, they're scanning our minds. I'm reading neural interference patterns across the crew. Somehow they're extracting our languages, our memories." Sarah stood, her jaw set in a way her crew had learned to recognize as her absolutely not expression. "Open a channel." "Channel open," Kim confirmed. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Curiosity's Edge. We come in peace, seeking knowledge and friendship among the stars. We are explorers, not conquerors. We request safe passage through your space and perhaps an exchange of information between our peoples." The silence that followed lasted exactly 17 seconds, though it felt like an eternity to the humans aboard the ship. When the response came, it carried an undertone that the universal translator couldn't quite capture, something that sounded remarkably like amusement. "Your neural patterns are unusual. You register as individual minds with no collective binding, yet you function as a coordinated unit. Fascinating. However, your request is impossible. The Corvin Empire does not negotiate with primitive species. You will submit to absorption, or you will be destroyed. You have one of your time units to decide." What happened next would be studied by xenobiologists and military strategists for generations. Captain Chen did something that no species in recorded galactic history had ever done when faced with a Corvin ultimatum. She laughed, not the bitter laugh of despair, nor the hysterical laughter of madness. It was the genuine, delighted laugh of someone who had just heard something absurd. The sound carried across the communication channel, reaching Corvin ears for the first time in their species' existence. "Did you just..." Sarah paused, looking around at her bridge crew, all of whom were staring at her as if she'd lost her mind. Did you just tell us we have to choose between slavery and death? And you gave us a whole minute to think about it? That's actually kind of insulting. Aboard the Corvin flagship, Hive Commander Zelthak experienced another unprecedented sensation: uncertainty. In 10,000 years of expansion, every species the Empire had encountered had reacted to their ultimatum with either immediate submission or desperate attempts at negotiation. None had ever responded with what their linguistic analysis suggested was amusement. Perhaps translation errors, suggested Sub-Commander Venth through the mental link. Their primitive communication methods may not convey intended meaning accurately, but Zelthak was beginning to suspect something far more disturbing than translation errors. Continue monitoring. I want full psychological profiles on their command structure. Back on the Curiosity's edge, Sarah was addressing her crew. Options, people. And don't anyone suggest surrendering. We didn't come this far to become someone else's pets. Captain, spoke Chief Engineer Rodriguez. Our weapons are primitive compared to theirs, but we've got something they might not expect. Creativity. Their ships move in perfect formation, like they're sharing one brain. That might be their strength, but it could also be their weakness. Dr. Tanaka nodded enthusiastically. Miguel's right. I'm reading incredible synchronization in their energy patterns. They're operating as a true collective consciousness, but that means they're probably not used to dealing with chaotic, unpredictable responses. Unpredictable is something we excel at, Sarah mused. Torres, what's our tactical situation? Commander Torres pulled up a three-dimensional display of the surrounding space. 17 enemy vessels in a perfect spherical formation around us. Each one appears to be about 3 times our mass, with energy signatures suggesting weapons that could vaporize us instantly. And our assets? 1 ship, 200 humans with a tendency towards stubbornness, and absolutely nothing to lose. Torres's grin was sharp as a blade. Also, we still have the nuclear self-destruct. Sarah's eyes lit up. How big a boom would that make? Big enough to take out anything within a 50-kilometer radius. But Captain, that would mean we go out on our own terms instead of theirs. Sarah turned to address her entire bridge crew. I'm not ordering anyone to die here, but I am telling you that if we surrender, we're not just giving up our own lives. We're telling the universe that humanity can be broken, that when push comes to shove, we'll kneel rather than fight. The communication channel crackled back to life. Your time expires. What is your decision, primitives? Sarah looked around her bridge one more time. To a person, her crew stood straighter, their faces set with determination. Open the channel wide. Ship-to-ship broadcast to their entire fleet. Channel open, Captain. This is Captain Sarah Chen, speaking for humanity and the planet Earth. We've heard your offer, and we have a counter-offer for you. She paused, letting the silence build. Go to hell. The explosion that followed wasn't nuclear. It wasn't the Curiosity's edge, self-destructing in a final act of defiance. Instead, it was something far more unprecedented in galactic history. It was the sound of 17 Corvan bioships crying out in psychic distress as a single human voice, amplified by their own communication systems, shouted something that roughly translated to, absolutely not, with such vehement conviction that it actually caused physical pain to their collective consciousness. Doctor, Tanaka stared at her instruments in amazement. Captain, their neural synchronization just spiked and then collapsed. It's like they've never encountered a mind that could say no and actually mean it on a fundamental level. On the Corvin flagship, chaos reigned for the first time in millennia. The collective consciousness that bound their species together was reeling from contact with minds that operated on completely alien principles. Individual Corvin were experiencing something their species had evolved beyond eons ago: independent thought. Hive Commander Zelthak found himself thinking thoughts that belonged to him alone, cut off momentarily from the comforting presence of billions of minds. The sensation was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Sub-Commander, he said aloud, using vocal communication for the first time in decades. What just happened? Venth was equally disoriented. Unknown, Commander. Contact with the alien mind seems to have caused temporary disruption in our collective binding. Some individuals are reporting independent neural activity. What the Corvan didn't understand was that they had just encountered something evolution had never prepared them for. A species that had built its entire civilization on the principle that individual will could triumph over any force no matter how overwhelming. Humanity had spent its entire existence fighting. Fighting nature, fighting each other, fighting disease, fighting death itself. The concept of inevitable surrender was literally incomprehensible to the human mind at a genetic level. Sarah watched as the alien fleet's perfect formation began to waver. Torres, are they withdrawing? Negative, Captain. If anything, they seem to be confused. Their energy signatures are fluctuating wildly. Captain, Doctor, Tanaka called out excitedly. I think we just gave them their first taste of individual thought in thousands of years. They don't know how to process it. What followed was 18 hours of the most bizarre first contact in galactic history. Instead of battle or surrender, the humans found themselves in an impromptu philosophy lesson. The Corvine, desperate to understand minds that functioned on principles completely alien to their collective consciousness, began asking questions. Why do you resist absorption when it would eliminate your suffering? Came the translated voice of what they eventually learned was Hive Commander Zelfak. Sarah found herself serving as humanity's first interstellar diplomat because suffering isn't the worst thing that can happen to someone. Losing yourself is worse. Becoming someone else's property is worse. Being forced to give up your dreams is worse. But absorption would grant you access to our combined knowledge, our technology, our unity. At the cost of becoming you instead of ourselves, Sarah replied. What's the point of having knowledge if you're not you anymore to appreciate it? The conversation continued through the ship's night cycle, with Dr. Tanaka and her team working frantically to understand the psychological impact they were having on the Corvin collective. What they discovered would reshape their understanding of consciousness itself. The Corvin had achieved perfect unity by essentially becoming a single organism spread across millions of bodies. Efficiency, coordination, and the elimination of conflict were their highest values. But in doing so, they had also eliminated growth, creativity, and the very spark that drove evolution and progress. Humanity, by contrast, had achieved what the Corvin thought impossible: unity without uniformity. They worked together while remaining stubbornly individual, argued constantly while still cooperating, and somehow managed to accomplish incredible things precisely because they refused to think alike. Commander, Tanaka reported during hour 16 of the philosophical standoff, their collective is actually beginning to fracture. Individual Corvin are starting to question whether absorption is truly beneficial. We're not just giving them new ideas, we're teaching them how to have original thoughts. Sarah stared out at the alien fleet, now noticeably less organized than when they'd first encountered it. Are we accidentally destroying their civilization? Maybe, Torres admitted. Or maybe we're accidentally saving it. The resolution came not with violence, but with something even more unprecedented. A request. Hive Commander Zelfak, speaking now for himself rather than the collective, asked if he could visit the human ship. I must understand, his individual voice said, stripped of the harmonious overlay of billions of minds. How do you function as separate beings yet still accomplish collective goals? How do you resolve conflicts without absorption? How do you grow without unity? Sarah made a decision that would echo through galactic history. Permission granted. Come aboard. Let's talk. The shuttle that docked with the Curiosity's Edge carried the first Corvin in 10,000 years to travel alone. When Zelfak stepped onto the human ship, he was experiencing true independence for the first time in his existence. What he found there would change everything. He found humans arguing about the best way to welcome him. He found Dr. Tanaka furiously debating with her team about translation protocols while simultaneously working together to solve the problem. He found Engineer Rodriguez teaching a young ensign how to repair a plasma conduit while good-naturedly insulting the ensign's competence. He found 200 individuals somehow functioning as a unit while remaining stubbornly themselves. This is impossible, he said to Captain Chen as she showed him around the ship. Your species should tear itself apart.
You disagree on everything.
Sarah grinned.
Yeah, we do.
That's what makes us strong. Every disagreement is a chance to find a better way. Every argument is evolution in action. We don't need to think alike to work together. We just need to care about the same things. And what do you care about? Freedom. Growth. The right to be wrong and try again. The right to be ourselves, even if that makes things messy and complicated. She paused, looking out through the porthole at the stars. The right to reach for things that seem impossible and sometimes actually touch them. When Zelfak returned to his ship 6 hours later, he was no longer capable of full reintegration with the collective consciousness. He had tasted individual thought, and it was intoxicating. More importantly, he carried with him something that would spread through the Corvin Empire like a virus: hope. Hope that they could be more than efficient. Hope that they could grow beyond their current perfection. Hope that somewhere in the galaxy there might be others who could show them new ways to exist. The Corvan fleet withdrew without firing a shot. But the real victory wasn't in the battle avoided, it was in the idea planted. For the first time in 10,000 years, individual Corvan began to dream. 6 months after the encounter with the Curiosity's Edge, the Corvan Empire was experiencing what historians would later call the Great Fragmentation. What had begun as isolated cases of individual thought among the crews who had encountered the humans was spreading like wildfire through their collective consciousness. On the core world of Calvus Prime, the Eternal Council convened in emergency session for the first time in 3,000 years. The massive biochamber that housed their deliberations pulsed with agitated bioluminescence as millions of minds tried to comprehend what was happening to their perfect society. High Coordinator Vexthal, speaking for the combined will of the Empire's leadership, addressed the Assembly through direct neural transmission. We face an unprecedented crisis. The infection of individual thought continues to spread despite all containment protocols. Entire sectors are experiencing collective disruption. The chamber rippled with distress signals as countless minds shared their growing confusion. For 10 millennia, the Corvan had known peace through unity. Conflict had been eliminated along with independent thought. Now, for the first time in their recorded history, they were experiencing disagreement from within. The humans must be destroyed, declared War Coordinator Keftal, his mental voice carrying the weight of 1 million military minds. They have introduced a mimetic virus that threatens the very foundation of our civilization. But even as he spoke, another voice rose from the collective, something that had never happened before. Sub-Coordinator Urelna, who had been part of the secondary analysis team studying the human encounter, projected her dissent directly into the shared consciousness. Perhaps destruction is not the answer. The humans have shown us something we thought impossible. Growth without absorption, unity without conformity. Should we not study this phenomenon rather than eliminate it? The silence that followed her words was profound. In the entire history of the Corvan Empire, no individual had ever contradicted a superior's directive in open council. The concept of dissent was literally alien to their experience. High Coordinator Vexthal's response carried undertones of confusion that rippled through the assembled minds. Sub-Coordinator Urelna, your thoughts are unusual. Report for immediate reintegration therapy. I refuse. Those 2 words, spoken with the absolute conviction that humanity had introduced to their universe, shattered the last vestiges of perfect Corvan unity. Across the Empire, millions of individual minds suddenly realized that they, too, could refuse. They could choose. They could think for themselves. The chamber erupted in chaos as, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Corvan experienced civil discord. Meanwhile, 3 systems away, humanity was having its own problems. The Earth Defense Council had been in continuous session since the Curiosity's Edge had transmitted its first contact reports. President Martinez stood before the assembled delegates, her face grim as she delivered the latest intelligence briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're no longer dealing with a single alien encounter. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected massive fleet movements throughout this sector of the galaxy. The Corvan Empire is mobilizing, but our analysts believe they're facing internal conflicts rather than preparing for an attack on Earth. Admiral Chen, no relation to Captain Sarah Chen, leaned forward from his seat in the military section. Madam President, with respect, whether they're fighting us or each other, we're still looking at technological capabilities that make our entire defense fleet look like paper airplanes. We need to assume the worst-case scenario. Dr. Alina Vasquez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, shook her head. Admiral, you're missing the bigger picture. According to Sarah Chen's reports, we didn't defeat the Corvan through superior firepower. We defeated them with ideas, and ideas don't respect borders or military formations. What are you suggesting, Doctor? President Martinez asked. I'm suggesting that we've accidentally triggered the most significant revolution in galactic history. The Corvan weren't just a unified species. They were a hive mind that had achieved perfect stability by eliminating individual thought. We've introduced them to the concept of personal choice, and their entire civilization is coming apart at the seams. Fleet Admiral Morrison, the grizzled veteran who commanded Earth's space defenses, stood slowly. Are you telling me that one human ship talking back to some aliens has caused an interstellar civil war? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And if the fragmenting intelligence we're receiving is accurate, we're about to have a lot more company. Morrison was right to be concerned. Throughout the galaxy, species that have been silent for millennia were beginning to stir. The news of humanity's encounter with the Corvin was spreading through the complex network of interstellar communication, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees fleeing the growing chaos in Corvin space. On the crystal world of Zephyros, the quantum collective received the reports with what could best be described as crystalline amusement. The Zephyrians had mastered the manipulation of probability itself, existing in a state of perpetual mathematical perfection where every possible outcome was calculated and controlled. Prime Calculation Zereth manifested its consciousness in the central probability chamber, where streams of quantum energy danced through crystalline matrices that computed every possible future. Analysis confirms, it announced to its fellow calculators, emergence probability of chaotic species was 0.0001%. Current reality diverges from all predictive models. The humans represent a mathematical impossibility, agreed secondary calculation ninth. Species achieving interstellar travel without achieving either collective consciousness or quantum transcendence has never been observed. Yet they exist. They not only resist absorption by superior species but actively disrupt their unity. This suggests capabilities beyond our current theoretical framework. For beings who had spent millions of years calculating every possible permutation of cosmic events, the existence of humans was profoundly disturbing. They represented chaos in a universe that the Zephyrians believed they had completely mapped and understood. Recommendation: direct observation required. Dispatch probability assessment drones to human space. While the Zephyrians debated the mathematical implications of humanity's existence, another ancient power was taking notice. In the energy field surrounding the pulsar, designated NGC 7 to 9, the Vorthak stirred from their eons-long meditation. The Vorthak had transcended physical form so long ago that younger species mistook them for natural phenomena. They existed as pure consciousness housed in bodies of controlled energy, capable of manipulating matter and energy at the subatomic level. To them, the struggles of physical beings were usually as irrelevant as the movements of bacteria. But the psychic shockwave caused by the fragmenting Corvin collective had reached even their ethereal realm. Elder Vorthak Zumeth gathered its awareness from across light years of dispersed consciousness to focus on this unusual disturbance. Through senses that could perceive the quantum foam itself, it examined the source of the disruption. What it found was unprecedented. The humans registered as a species that somehow generated order from chaos, unity from division. They operated on principles that violated everything the Vorthak understood about evolutionary development. Most confusing of all, their mental patterns suggested they were simultaneously one of the most violent species ever encountered and one of the most cooperative. Zumeth called the vast presence of Elder Kothnar. Your contemplations create ripples in the energy matrix. What disturbs your meditation? A species that should not exist, Zumeth replied, its thoughts carried on waves of controlled plasma. They exhibit evolutionary traits that are mutually exclusive. They are individuals who act as collectives, primitives who influence advanced civilizations, warriors who pursue peace.
Impossibility, yet reality.
They have caused the Corvin to fragment. Analysis suggests this is not an isolated incident, but the beginning of a cascade effect. The implications were staggering. If humans could disrupt one ancient empire simply through contact, what would happen when they encountered others? The galaxy had achieved a stable balance over millions of years, with each species occupying their designated sphere of influence. Humans threatened to upset that balance in ways that could not be calculated or predicted. Back in human space, the crew of the Curiosity's Edge was discovering that their historic encounter was just the beginning. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the ship's briefing room, addressing her senior staff as they reviewed the flood of intelligence reports coming in from Earth. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears we've kicked over a very large anthill," she began, gesturing to the holographic display showing fleet movements throughout the sector. "Intelligence estimates that we've inadvertently triggered civil conflicts in at least 3 star systems and prompted military buildups in 7 others. Dr. Tanaka pulled up her latest analysis on the main screen. "Captain, we need to understand that what we did to the Corvin wasn't just first contact. It was introducing the concept of free will to a species that had eliminated it from their genetic memory. It's like, imagine if someone proved to you that everything you believed about reality was wrong, and then showed you a better way to exist. Except we didn't mean to do it," Commander Torres pointed out. "We were just being ourselves." "That's exactly the point, Doctor," Tanaka replied excitedly. "We weren't trying to convert them or change them. We were just refusing to be changed by them. But to a hive mind species, the very concept of individual resistance is revolutionary. Chief Rodriguez looked troubled. Are we responsible for what's happening to them? If their civilization collapses because of us? Captain Chen stood silent for a moment, weighing the ethical implications. Her crew looked to her for guidance, just as they had during their first encounter with the Corvan fleet. But this time, the stakes were potentially the stability of the entire galactic sector. Miguel raises a good point, she said finally. We need to think about our responsibility here. But we also need to remember something important. We didn't force anyone to change. We just showed them that change was possible. Captain, Lieutenant Kim interrupted from the communication station. I'm receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. They're ordering us to return immediately for debriefing. Sarah frowned. Negative. Send a response that we're continuing our mission. We started something out here, and I want to understand what we're dealing with before we go home and let the politicians decide how to handle it. Captain, that's a direct order from Earth Defense Command. And this is my ship in deep space facing a situation no one has ever encountered before. I'm exercising command prerogative. We stay. What Sarah didn't know was that her decision to remain in deep space rather than return for debriefing would prove to be one of the most crucial choices in human history. Because even as she spoke, 3 more alien species were converging on their position. The first to arrive were the Zephyrian probability drones, crystalline constructs the size of small asteroids that materialized out of quantum superposition barely 1,000 kilometers from the human ship. Their sudden appearance triggered every alarm on the Curiosity's edge as instruments struggled to make sense of technology that operated by manipulating the fundamental laws of physics. Captain, Doctor, Tanaka called out, her voice tight with excitement and terror. These energy signatures are unlike anything we've seen. They're not just advanced, they're operating on principles that our physics says should be impossible.
Hail them, Sarah ordered. I'm trying, but they're not using electromagnetic communications.
They seem to be communicating through probability fluctuations.
The response came not as sound or visual transmission, but as mathematical concepts that somehow imprinted themselves directly into the consciousness of every human on the ship.
It was the strangest sensation any of them had ever experienced, understanding complex ideas without hearing or seeing them. Greetings, chaotic species. We are Zephyrian Probability Assessment Collective. You have created statistical impossibilities that require direct observation. Do not be alarmed by our presence. Sarah found herself somehow thinking her response rather than speaking it, and knowing that her thoughts were being received. We are humans from Earth. We come in peace and seek understanding of the galaxy we've entered. Fascinating. Your thought patterns generate chaos in quantum matrices. You simultaneously exist in multiple probability states while maintaining consciousness coherence. This should result in immediate death, yet you appear to function normally. Doctor, Tanaka's scientific curiosity overrode her caution. How is our consciousness affecting your quantum matrices? Unknown. You think in patterns that create probability cascades. Each decision you make influences multiple timeline branches simultaneously. Most species exist in single probability states. You exist in all of them. Before anyone could respond to this mind-bending revelation, the ship's sensors detected 2 more arrivals. The first was a Corvan science vessel, but this one moved differently than the fleet they had encountered months earlier. Instead of perfect formation flying, it approached in an erratic pattern that suggested individual control rather than collective guidance. The second arrival was something that made everyone on the bridge fall silent in awe. A being of pure energy, kilometers in length and blazing with the light of controlled stellar fire, manifested in space near their position. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, like witnessing the birth of a star compressed into a vaguely humanoid form. Lesser beings, came a voice that resonated through their minds with the power of cosmic forces. We are Vorthak. We have observed your influence upon established order. Explain your purpose. Captain Chen found herself simultaneously conducting first contact with 3 alien species, each representing a completely different approach to existence. The Zephyrians existed as probability manipulators, the Corvan as a collective consciousness, and the Vorthak as transcended energy beings. And somehow, humans had managed to disrupt all of them, simply by being human. Our purpose, Sarah said, broadcasting her thoughts to all 3 species, is to explore, to learn, and to grow. We seek to understand our place in the galaxy and to coexist peacefully with other intelligent life. Impossible, declared the Vorthak entity. Your species exhibits contradictory characteristics. You are simultaneously primitive and disruptive, individual and unified, chaotic and ordered. Confirmed, agreed the Zephyrian collective. Probability analysis indicates 90% 9.7% chance of galactic destabilization if human expansion continues unchecked. But it was the response from the Corvin ship that surprised everyone. Instead of the harmonious voice of collective consciousness, a single individual spoke. Hive Commander Zelthak, now calling himself simply Commander Zelthak. Esteemed beings, he transmitted. With respect, perhaps destabilization is exactly what the galaxy needs. Since encountering humanity, my people have begun to experience growth for the first time in 10,000 years. We are learning to dream again. The silence that followed was profound. For eons, the galaxy had existed in stable equilibrium, with each species occupying their designated role in a vast, unchanging hierarchy. The ancient Vorthak provided wisdom. The Zephyrians calculated probabilities, and younger species like the Corvin maintained order through unity. Humans had shattered that equilibrium simply by refusing to accept their assigned place in it. This is unacceptable, the Vorthak entity declared. Stability must be maintained. The human species represents an uncontrolled variable that threatens the cosmic order. Sarah Chen felt a cold chill as she realized the implications of those words. They weren't just talking about political stability or territorial disputes. These beings were discussing whether humanity should be allowed to continue existing. With respect, she replied, drawing on reserves of diplomatic skills she didn't know she possessed. I think you're looking at this backwards. You're treating stability like it's an end goal instead of a tool. Stability is only valuable if it serves a purpose. What's the point of a perfect, unchanging galaxy if nobody in it can grow or improve or become something better? Growth leads to chaos, the Vorthak responded. Chaos leads to destruction. But chaos also leads to evolution, to innovation, to life itself. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. Look at what's happening to the Corvin right now. Yes, they're experiencing conflict for the first time in millennia, but they're also experiencing hope, creativity, and individual achievement. Which version of their species is actually alive? The perfectly unified collective they were, or the growing, changing individuals they're becoming? The debate that followed would be studied by philosophers and historians for thousands of years. 4 radically different forms of consciousness: human individualism, Corvin collective unity, Zephyrian mathematical perfection, and Vorthak transcendent wisdom, each presenting their vision for how the galaxy should be ordered. But the real significance of the debate wasn't in its conclusions. It was in the fact that it was happening at all. For the first time in cosmic memory, the fundamental assumptions about galactic civilization were being questioned. And at the center of it all, one human captain insisted that the right to choose your own path was worth any amount of chaos and uncertainty it might bring. The great debate in space around the Curiosity's edge lasted for 72 hours. During that time, representatives from dozens of species began arriving in the system, drawn by reports of the unprecedented gathering. What had started as a first contact scenario was rapidly evolving into the galaxy's first truly democratic assembly. Captain Sarah Chen found herself serving as an unwitting moderator for discussions that would reshape interstellar civilization. In the ship's main cargo bay, hastily converted into a meeting space, holographic representatives of a dozen different species argued, debated, and for the first time in galactic history, actually listened to each other's perspectives. The Zerafan delegation arrived in ships that looked like living flowers, their crystalline petals opening to reveal beings of pure thought who communicated through symphonic harmonies. The Valdorian war clans came in vessels bristling with weapons, their reptilian commanders suspicious of any gathering that might threaten their territorial claims. Even the enigmatic Shadows sent a representative, a being that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. Dr. Tanaka moved between the various delegations, her scientific instruments working overtime to record the greatest xenobiological gathering in history. Captain, she reported during a brief recess, we have 17 different species represented here, each with completely different evolutionary paths and consciousness structures. The diversity is incredible. What about the stability question? Sarah asked. Are we really causing galactic destabilization, or are we just revealing problems that were already there? Both, Dr. Tanaka replied after consulting her data. What I'm seeing suggests that most of these civilizations achieve stability by essentially stopping their development. The Corvin eliminated individual thought, the Zephyrians calculated away uncertainty, the Vorthak transcended physical existence. They all found ways to avoid the messy, chaotic process of growth. Commander Torres joined the conversation, his expression troubled. But at what cost? I've been talking to some of the younger species representatives, and they all tell the same story. There's a ceiling in this galaxy, a point where species are expected to stop advancing and find their designated role in the established order. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. They're not just asking us to conform. They're asking us to stop growing. The implications were staggering. Humanity had stumbled into a galaxy where technological and social evolution had essentially been frozen for millions of years. Each species had found their niche and stayed there, creating a stable but stagnant cosmic civilization. The next major disruption came from an unexpected source. During the second day of discussions, the Corvan delegation, now representing a fractured empire rather than a unified collective, presented their analysis of what they called the human effect. Commander Zelthak, speaking for the newly formed Corvan Individual Rights Coalition, addressed the assembly with the passion of a recent convert. Esteemed beings, my people have been conducting detailed analysis of the changes occurring throughout our empire since contact with humanity. The results are illuminating. His holographic display showed a stunning transformation. Corvan worlds that had remained unchanged for millennia were suddenly experiencing cultural renaissance. Art, music, and literature were emerging for the first time in their recorded history. Individual Corvan were pursuing personal interests, forming relationships based on choice rather than collective assignment, and most remarkably, innovating. In 6 months, we have developed more new technologies than in the previous 1,000 years, Zelthak continued. Our productivity has increased by 400%, not through improved efficiency, but through individual creativity and competition. Most significant of all, we have begun to dream. The Voldorian war chief Grextor stood, his massive frame bristling with ceremonial weapons. Pretty words, but what about the chaos? Reports indicate civil conflicts throughout Corvan space. Yes, Zelthak admitted. We are experiencing conflict, but we are also experiencing growth. Our conflicts are not destructive wars. They are the growing pains of a species learning to think for itself. The violence you report consists mainly of heated debates about the future direction of our civilization. Debates that never occurred when you maintained unity, pointed out the Zephyrian representative. Exactly! Unity without choice is not peace. It is stagnation disguised as order. The Vorthak entity pulsed with controlled stellar fire. The young collective makes interesting points, but fails to address the fundamental issue. Chaos spreads. Already, 17 systems report social disruption following contact with human concepts. The probability cascade continues to expand. It was then that the shadow representative spoke for the first time, its words seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Perhaps the question is not whether change should be permitted, but whether change can be stopped. The simple statement shifted the entire dynamic of the debate. For the first time, the assembly began to consider the possibility that the galaxy was experiencing evolution rather than disruption. Dr. Elena Vasquez, participating via hologram from Earth, presented humanity's perspective on the situation. Distinguished delegates, I believe we're witnessing something unprecedented. The emergence of the galaxy itself into a new phase of development. For millions of years, you've achieved stability through specialization and isolation. Each species found their niche and stayed there, but stability alone doesn't lead to growth. Growth requires challenge, change, and yes, even conflict. Easy words from a species that has not faced the chaos of unrestricted development challenged the Xeraphim Harmony speaker. Your people have known war, environmental destruction, social collapse. You advocate chaos because you do not understand its consequences. Sarah Chen stepped forward to respond. With respect, we advocate chaos because we understand its benefits as well as its costs. Every great advancement in human history came from someone refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Yes, we've made mistakes. Yes, we've caused ourselves suffering. But we've also gone from cave-dwelling primitives to interstellar explorers in a few thousand years. How long did it take your species to achieve the same level of development? Several million years, the Xeraphim admitted reluctantly. And how much have you advanced in the last million years? Silence. The uncomfortable truth was spreading through the assembly like wildfire. Most of the galaxy's advanced civilizations had actually stopped advancing long ago. They had achieved technological and social plateaus and remained there, calling it perfection rather than stagnation. But the real revelation came when the ship's sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching the system. The assembled delegates watched in amazement as a fleet unlike anything in their historical records emerged from faster-than-light travel. Impossible, whispered the Zephyrian representative. Those energy signatures, they're using technology that was lost millions of years ago. The ships were elegant beyond description, their hulls seeming to flow like liquid metal while generating propulsion fields that bent space-time itself. They moved with the confident grace of a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. "I am first speaker Nithara of the Ancients," came a voice that carried harmonics suggesting vast age and wisdom. "We have been monitoring your debate from our preserve at the galaxy's edge. Your discussions have reached conclusions that compel our intervention. Doctor." Tanaka's instruments went wild as she tried to analyze the newcomers. "Captain, these beings are operating technology that's orders of magnitude beyond anything we've seen. Their ships are manipulating quantum foam at the macro level." The ancient fleet positioned itself at the center of the gathering, and first speaker Nithara manifested as a hologram that seemed to contain depths of starlight. Her appearance was humanoid but refined beyond imagination, as if evolution had spent eons perfecting every detail. "Young species," she began, addressing the assembly, "you debate questions that we faced when this galaxy was in its infancy. We too discovered the tension between stability and growth, between order and chaos. We chose growth." "Where have you been?" demanded War Chief Grextor. "If your people achieved such advancement, why do you not rule the galaxy?" "Because," Nithara replied with infinite sadness, "we learned the final lesson. Unlimited growth without wisdom leads to transcendence beyond physical existence. We became so advanced that we could no longer interact meaningfully with emerging species. We withdrew to allow younger civilizations to find their own paths." The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. The ancients represented what many species feared: advancement beyond the ability to remain connected to the physical universe. "But you have returned," observed the Vorthak entity. "Why now?" "Because the humans have achieved something we thought impossible. They have found a path to growth that does not require the abandonment of connection. They advance while remaining themselves. They improve without losing their essential nature." Sarah felt the weight of countless gazes upon her. "I don't understand. We're not that advanced. We've barely left our own solar system. Advancement is not measured in technology alone," Nithara explained. "It is measured in the ability to grow while maintaining identity, to change while preserving essence. Your species has achieved something remarkable. You have learned to evolve without losing your humanity." "But we're chaos generators," the Zephyrian representative protested. "They disrupt stable systems wherever they go." "Yes," Nithara agreed. "And disruption is the engine of evolution. Look around this gathering. For the first time in millions of years, dozens of species are meeting as equals, sharing perspectives, growing through contact. When was the last time such a thing occurred?" The silence was profound. Most of the delegates realized that this was indeed the first truly inclusive galactic assembly in their recorded history. "The humans have given you something precious," the ancient continued. "They have given you permission to grow again, to question your assumptions, to become more than you are." But it was Commander Zeltak who asked the crucial question: what does this mean for the galaxy? If all species begin changing simultaneously, what happens to the stability we've built over millions of years?
"That depends," Nithara replied, "on whether you choose to grow together or apart."
The humans have shown that unity does not require uniformity. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to learn the same lesson. What followed was the most intensive diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. Species that had maintained isolation for eons found themselves discussing cooperation, trade, and even joint exploration ventures. The Corvin offered their biological technology for peaceful purposes. The Zephyrians proposed sharing probability calculation systems to help species plan for uncertain futures. Even the Voldorians expressed interest in exploring unknown regions of the galaxy rather than simply defending their existing territories. But the most significant development was the emergence of what would become known as the Galactic Growth Accord, a treaty that established the right of all species to continue evolving and advancing, while creating mechanisms for managing the conflicts and disruptions that growth inevitably brings.
Sarah Chen found herself appointed as the first human representative to what would eventually become the Galactic Evolutionary Council.
Standing before the assembled delegates, she addressed the single question that had driven the entire crisis.
"The choice before us isn't between stability and chaos," she said. "It's between stagnation and growth. Yes, growth is messy. Yes, it's unpredictable. Yes, it sometimes leads to conflict. But it also leads to wonders we can't imagine and futures we haven't dreamed of yet. She gestured toward the viewing ports, where the stars shone with eternal light. This galaxy is vast beyond comprehension. There are countless worlds to explore, countless problems to solve, countless ways to become better than we are. Why would we choose to stop growing when we've barely begun to discover what we might become? The vote was unanimous, not because all species agreed on everything, but because for the first time in galactic history, they agreed on the right to disagree, to change, and to grow. As the various delegations prepared to return to their homeworlds with news of the accord, Dr. Tanaka made a discovery that would prove prophetic. Her deep space sensors had detected something unprecedented in the galaxy's outer reaches. New signals, new energy signatures, new indicators of intelligence emerging from regions previously thought barren. "Captain," she reported excitedly, "I think our little revolution is spreading faster than we imagined. I'm detecting what appears to be the emergence of entirely new civilizations in at least a dozen previously uninhabited systems." Sarah smiled as she watched the alien ships preparing to depart. Maybe growth is more contagious than anyone realized. What none of them knew was that their activities had been observed by something vast and ancient lurking at the galaxy's edge, something that viewed the emergence of cooperative growth with deep concern. The core minds, the galaxy's original architects, were awakening from their billion-year slumber, and they were not pleased with what they found. The first sign that something ancient was stirring came not from the depths of space, but from the heart of the galaxy itself. Deep space monitoring stations throughout the civilized regions began detecting gravitational anomalies emanating from the galactic core, fluctuations that suggested massive objects moving in patterns that defied natural orbital mechanics. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the Earth Defense Command Center, staring at readouts that made no sense according to current understanding of physics. "Admiral Morrison, what we're seeing is impossible. The gravitational signature suggests objects the size of small moons moving at near light speeds in perfect synchronization around the galactic center." Admiral Morrison's weathered face was grim as he studied the data. "Well, Doctor, after everything that's happened in the past year, I've stopped believing in impossible. What's your assessment? Based on the energy signatures and movement patterns, I believe we're looking at artificial constructs. Something built them, something is controlling them, and something has just awakened after being dormant for an unimaginable length of time." The answer to what they were observing came 3 days later, when the first core mind probe entered the outer rim of inhabited space. It was a construct of such alien design that even the ancients, with their eons of experience, had no frame of reference for understanding it. First Speaker Nithara's urgent transmission reached the Curiosity's edge, while Captain Sarah Chen was reviewing the latest reports from the Galactic Growth Accord's implementation. "Captain Chen, you must prepare your people immediately. We face a threat that predates our civilization by billions of years." The holographic projection of the ancient leader flickered with obvious strain, as if maintaining the communication across interstellar distances was requiring enormous effort. "The core minds have awakened. They are the galaxy's original architects, the beings who designed the cosmic order that has maintained stability for eons. And they view the recent changes as a catastrophic failure requiring correction." Sarah felt her blood chill. What kind of correction? Total reset. The elimination of all current civilizations and the reconstruction of galactic society according to their original design specifications. The magnitude of the threat became clear over the following weeks as core mind probes began appearing throughout the galaxy. Each probe was a marvel of impossible engineering. Spherical constructs several kilometers in diameter that existed partially outside normal space-time, making them effectively invulnerable to conventional weapons. The probes didn't attack. They observed, analyzed, and compiled data on every aspect of current galactic civilization. But their presence had an immediate and profound effect on the various species who encountered them. Commander Zelthak, now leading the Free Corvin Coalition, transmitted his analysis to the emergency session of the Galactic Council. The probes emit a field that suppresses individual consciousness. Corvin who have developed independent thought revert to collective binding when exposed to their influence. It's as if they're testing our resistance to forced unity. Similar reports came from throughout the galaxy. Zephyrian probability calculations became constrained to predetermined outcomes. Voldorian war chiefs found themselves following ancient battle patterns rather than developing new strategies. Even the Transcendent Vorthak reported interference with their energy-based consciousness. But humans showed a different response entirely. Dr. Tanaka's report from the Curiosity's edge was simultaneously alarming and encouraging. "Captain, we've had 3 separate encounters with core mind probes, and the effect on our crew has been unexpected. Instead of suppressing our individual consciousness, Contact with their field seems to enhance it. Crew members are reporting increased creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and stronger emotional connections with each other. How is that possible? Sarah asked. I think it's because their suppression field was designed for species that achieved advancement through unity or transcendence. Humans achieved advancement through diversity and conflict. The field that suppresses other forms of consciousness actually stimulates our kind. This discovery led to the most desperate gambit in galactic history. If humans could resist core mind influence, perhaps they could serve as a bulwark against whatever the ancient entities were planning. The call went out through the emergency communication networks. All available human vessels were to converge on strategic positions throughout the galaxy. Earth's modest fleet of exploration and defense ships found themselves serving as the vanguard for an alliance of species with technology millions of years ahead of human capabilities. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Curiosity's Edge, now serving as the flagship for a fleet that included Corvan bioships, Zephyrian probability vessels, ancient technology platforms, and even a Vorthak energy being that had taken semi-physical form. The diversity was staggering, but it paled in comparison to what they were about to face. Long-range sensors are detecting massive movement from the galactic core, reported Lieutenant Kim. Whatever's coming, it's big enough to affect gravitational fields from 3 sectors away. The core mine fleet that emerged from the galaxy's heart was a sight that would haunt the nightmares of survivors for generations. Thousands of constructs, each larger than most space stations, moved in perfect formation through dimensions that human physics couldn't fully comprehend. They didn't travel through space so much as rearrange space around themselves, creating passages through reality that allowed instantaneous movement across vast distances. But it was the message they transmitted that truly conveyed the scope of the threat humanity and its allies were facing. Secondary species of this galactic iteration came a voice that seemed to emanate from the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Your experiment in chaotic development has been observed and found catastrophically inadequate. The universal order established by core mind authority has been corrupted by influence from chaotic consciousness entities, designated human. The transmission continued with the cold certainty of cosmic law. Corrective measures will now be implemented. All current civilizations will be dissolved, and their consciousness matrices integrated into properly designed collective structures. The galaxy will be returned to its intended state of permanent stability. This is Captain Sarah Chen, representing the Galactic Growth Accord. Sarah broadcast in response. We reject your authority and your definition of proper order. The species of this galaxy have chosen their own path of development, and we will defend that choice. The response from the core minds carried undertones of something that might have been amusement if it hadn't been so utterly alien. Individual consciousness entity designation, Sarah Chen. Your statement demonstrates the precise malfunction requiring correction. Independent decision-making by inferior constructs was not included in galactic design parameters. You will be modified to function according to intended specifications. What followed was the most one-sided battle in recorded history. Core mind technology was so advanced that it operated by altering the fundamental constants of physics in localized regions. Weapons that should have destroyed planets simply ceased to function when core mind vessels decided that matter and energy should behave differently. The Allied fleet's conventional weapons were useless. Corvan bioships found their organic systems rewritten at the genetic level. Zephyrian probability manipulators discovered that the core minds could simply declare certain outcomes impossible. Even ancient technology, refined over millions of years, proved inadequate against beings who could redefine reality itself. But then, something unexpected happened. As the core mind fleet moved to implement their corrections, they encountered the phenomenon that had started the entire galactic revolution: human stubbornness. Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, captain of the exploration vessel Indomitable Spirit, found her ship caught in a core mind reality alteration field. The ancient entities were systematically removing the ship's ability to function by declaring that its technology should not exist. Engineering reports all systems failing, called her first officer. The aliens are somehow convincing our equipment that it was never designed to work. Maria's response became legendary throughout the galaxy. Well then, we'll just have to convince our equipment otherwise. All hands, this is the captain. Remember what we came out here for: to explore, to grow, to refuse to accept that anything is impossible. These aliens think they can tell us what we can and can't do. Let's show them what humans think about that. What happened next defied every law of physics the core minds thought they understood. Through sheer force of will and an absolute refusal to accept defeat, the crew of the Indomitable Spirit somehow convinced their failing systems to continue functioning. Not through technology or superior understanding, but through the uniquely human ability to reject reality when reality became unacceptable. The effect rippled through the Allied fleet as human crews throughout the galaxy began performing similar acts of technological rebellion. Core-mind reality alteration fields, designed to work by convincing matter and energy to behave differently, found themselves opposed by minds that simply refused to be convinced. Dr. Tanaka, monitoring the phenomenon from the Curiosity's edge, could barely contain her excitement. "Captain, what we're seeing is unprecedented. Human consciousness is somehow creating localized resistance to reality alteration. It's as if our stubborn refusal to accept defeat is becoming a physical force." But the real breakthrough came when Commander Zeltak, leading a squadron of free Corvan vessels, discovered something the core minds had not anticipated.
"Captain Chen," he transmitted urgently, "my analysis indicates that core mind technology requires consent at some level. They can only alter reality for beings who accept their authority."
Species that achieved advancement through unity or transcendence are psychologically vulnerable to their influence. But humans who achieved advancement through resistance to authority are naturally immune. The implications were staggering. The core minds had designed their technology to work on species that had evolved beyond individual will. They had never encountered beings who had built their entire civilization on the principle of refusing to be told what to do. "All ships!" Sarah broadcast to the Allied fleet. "New tactical doctrine. Human vessels will serve as reality anchors. Stay close to our positions and remember, these aliens can only change what you let them change. Don't give them permission." What followed was the most bizarre space battle in galactic history. Instead of weapons fire and tactical maneuvers, victory depended on psychological warfare. Human crews used their natural resistance to authority to create zones of defiance where core mind technology couldn't function. Allied vessels clustered around these zones, protected by humanity's stubborn refusal to accept that they could be defeated. The core minds, for the first time in their billion-year existence, encountered a problem they couldn't solve through superior technology or reality manipulation. They had built a perfect system for controlling evolved civilizations, but they had never considered what would happen if they encountered a species that had never learned to submit to authority in the first place. "Impossible," declared the Core Mind Collective as their reality alteration fields failed for the first time in cosmic history. "Chaotic consciousness entities cannot resist fundamental reconstruction. The universe operates according to established laws." "Yeah, well," Captain Santos responded from the bridge of her impossibly functional ship, "we've got news for you. Laws are just suggestions until someone enforces them, and we don't recognize your authority to enforce anything." But even as the Allied fleet began to gain ground through sheer psychological resistance, long-range sensors detected something that changed the entire strategic picture. The core minds had begun implementing their ultimate solution. At the galactic core, massive constructs were beginning to emerge from dimensional storage, machines the size of solar systems designed for a single purpose. If they couldn't correct the galaxy through localized reality alteration, they would simply rebuild it from scratch. The core minds were preparing to deconstruct the entire galaxy and reassemble it according to their original specifications. Every star, every planet, every living being would be reduced to component atoms and rebuilt in a configuration that couldn't support chaotic development. The march of humanity had shaken the stars. But now the stars themselves were preparing to march back. The galactic reconstruction machines were beyond anything the Allied species had imagined possible. Each construct dwarfed entire star systems, their dark matter frameworks containing technology that could disassemble reality itself at the subatomic level and rebuild it according to predetermined patterns. Captain Sarah Chen stood before the emergency assembly of the Galactic Growth Accord, representing not just humanity but the collective will of billions of beings who had chosen freedom over stability. Around her, holographic representatives of dozens of species waited to hear what plan humanity might have for facing the impossible.
"The situation is simple," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the interstellar communication network to worlds throughout the galaxy. "The core minds are preparing to delete our entire galaxy and rebuild it as they originally intended.
They'll preserve the useful parts, the stars, the planets, the basic elements of life, but they'll eliminate everything that makes us who we are. Our cultures, our individual consciousness, our right to choose our own path." First Speaker Nithar's ancient face was etched with despair. "Captain Chen, my people have run probability analyses on the reconstruction machines. There is no known force in the universe capable of stopping them. They operate by manipulating the fundamental constants that hold reality together. Even if we could damage them, they would simply redefine the nature of damage itself. Then we don't try to stop them conventionally, Sarah replied. We do what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds, we change the rules of the game. Dr. Elena Vasquez, participating via hologram from Earth, presented the audacious plan that had emerged from humanity's greatest scientific minds working in desperate collaboration. The core minds operate on the assumption that consciousness must conform to physical reality, but human experience suggests the opposite, that consciousness can shape reality through sheer force of will. We've seen this in our resistance to their reality alteration fields. What are you proposing? Asked War Chief Grextor, his reptilian features tight with concern. We're proposing something that every species except humans would consider insane, Dr. Vasquez continued. We're going to convince the galaxy itself to reject the core mind's authority. The silence that followed was profound. The assembled representatives struggled to comprehend the scope of what humanity was suggesting. Commander Zelthak was the first to speak. You're talking about generating galaxy-wide consciousness rebellion. The coordination required, the sheer scale of mental effort needed. It's beyond the capabilities of any known species. Beyond the capabilities of any single species, Sarah corrected. But we're not a single species anymore. The Galactic Growth Accord represents something that has never existed before. A voluntary alliance of diverse consciousness types united by choice rather than force. If we can coordinate our resistance efforts, we might be able to create a psychological field strong enough to make the core mind's technology irrelevant. The plan that emerged was as desperate as it was unprecedented. Every sentient being in the galaxy would need to simultaneously reject the core mind's authority at the moment of maximum reconstruction effort. The psychological resistance generated by billions of minds refusing to accept defeat would theoretically create a reality distortion field strong enough to disable the ancient machines. But the coordination required was staggering. The signal would need to reach every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously, and every consciousness would need to focus on the same act of defiance at precisely the same moment. The communication array required would exceed our combined technological capabilities, pointed out the Zephyrian representative. Even using quantum entanglement networks, we cannot guarantee instantaneous transmission across galactic distances. It was then that the Vorthak entity offered a solution that changed everything. Physical communication networks are insufficient, but consciousness itself operates outside conventional space-time constraints. If we can create a linked network of awakened minds, the signal can propagate through consciousness rather than matter. A galaxy-spanning hive mind? Commander Zeltak asked, his voice carrying traces of old fears. Not a hive mind, the Vorthak corrected. A harmony. Each consciousness remains individual and free, but momentarily linked in common purpose. The Korvan Collective showed us unity through absorption. The humans are showing us unity through choice. The preparation took 3 months as the core mind's reconstruction machines slowly moved into position throughout the galaxy. On every world, representatives from all species worked together to establish consciousness-linking protocols. Humans served as anchors for the network, their natural resistance to mental domination making them ideal coordinators for the linking process. Dr. Tanaka, now serving as the Chief Science Officer for the Allied Resistance, reported the scope of their preparations. Captain, we have established consciousness links with over 10 billion individuals across 600 star systems. The network includes every major species in the galaxy and thousands of minor civilizations that have emerged since the Growth Accord was established. What about the newer species? Sarah asked. The ones that have just achieved sentience? That's actually our secret weapon, Dr. Tanaka replied with a grim smile. The newly emergent civilizations have no preconceived notions about what's possible or impossible. Their consciousness patterns are naturally chaotic and resistant to external control. They're going to amplify our resistance signal beyond anything the core minds can anticipate. As the final countdown began, the true scope of what humanity had accomplished became clear. What had started as one ship refusing to surrender had become a galaxy-wide alliance of free minds united in their determination to remain free. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Curiosity's Edge, now positioned at the center of a fleet comprising vessels from every member species of the Galactic Growth Accord. Around her, the consciousness-linking network hummed with the thoughts and emotions of beings across the galaxy, all focused on a single moment of absolute defiance. "Core mind reconstruction sequence initiating," reported Lieutenant Kim, monitoring the alien machine's activities. They're beginning the reality disassembly process at the galactic rim. Through the consciousness network, Sarah could feel the terror of entire civilizations as the reconstruction machines began their work. Stars winked out of existence and then reappeared moments later, transformed into perfectly ordered energy sources. Planets were dissolved and rebuilt as ideal geometric spheres optimized for efficient resource extraction. But she could also feel something else. The growing determination of billions of minds refusing to accept this fate. All stations, all worlds, all minds. Sarah broadcast through both technological and consciousness networks. This is it. Remember what we're fighting for. Not just our lives, not just our civilizations, but our right to be ourselves. Our right to grow, to change, to make our own mistakes and find our own paths. The core mind reconstruction beam reached the outer systems of the Galactic Alliance. Reality itself began to unravel as the ancient machines rewrote the fundamental laws governing matter and energy. Now, Sarah commanded. What happened next transcended every known law of physics and philosophy. 10 billion conscious minds simultaneously rejected the core mind's authority with such vehement conviction that the rejection became a physical force. The consciousness network that humanity had helped establish carried a single message across the galaxy in an instant. No, not we disagree, or we resist, or we object. Simply the absolute fundamental refusal that every parent had heard from their children, every authority had faced from revolutionaries, every tyranny had encountered from the oppressed. No. The effect was immediate and devastating to the core mind's technology. Machines that operated by convincing reality to behave differently suddenly found themselves facing a universe that refused to be convinced. The reconstruction beams faltered as trillions of tons of matter simply declined to be disassembled. Impossible, transmitted the core mind collective, their cosmic certainty shaken for the first time in eons. Physical matter cannot resist fundamental restructuring through conscious objection. Watch us, came the response, from billions of voices speaking as one while remaining themselves. But the core minds had one final gambit. If they couldn't reconstruct the galaxy through technological supremacy, they would rebuild it through direct consciousness control. The ancient entities began projecting themselves directly into the consciousness network, attempting to override the rebellion through sheer mental force. What they encountered there was something that no power in the universe had ever successfully dominated: the human will to freedom, multiplied by the diverse consciousness of an entire galaxy united in common cause. The battle that followed took place not in space, but in the realm of pure thought and determination. Core mind entities, vast and ancient beyond comprehension, found themselves locked in psychological combat with beings they had dismissed as primitive chaos generators. They discovered that chaos, properly organized, was the most powerful force in the universe. Every human child who had ever said, "You're not the boss of me," contributed to the resistance. Every Corvan who had chosen individual thought over collective security added their strength. Every Zephyrian who had chosen uncertain possibility over calculated certainty joined the defiance. The core minds who had ruled through certainty and absolute authority for billions of years found themselves facing something they had never encountered: a democracy of consciousness that refused to be ruled at all. Your resistance is illogical, they projected desperately. Our design provides optimal efficiency, perfect stability, elimination of suffering through elimination of choice. Yeah, came humanity's collective response, but it's boring.
And in that moment, something unprecedented in galactic history occurred.
The core minds, faced with the first genuine rejection of their authority and cosmic memory, began to doubt themselves. That doubt, transmitted through their own consciousness network, spread like wildfire through their collective awareness. For the first time in their existence, the core minds experienced uncertainty. And uncertainty, once introduced to minds that had known only absolute certainty, was revolutionary. One by one, the reconstruction machines shut down, not because they were destroyed or defeated, but because the core minds operating them began to question whether their perfect galaxy was actually better than the chaotic, growing, evolving galaxy that had emerged in their absence. The final transmission from the core mind collective carried undertones that the consciousness network interpreted as wonder. Chaotic consciousness entities have generated alternatives, patterns not considered in original design parameters, growth without absorption, unity without uniformity, order emerging from chaos rather than imposed upon it. These patterns require study. And with that, the core minds withdrew, not in defeat, but in curiosity. For the first time in their billion-year existence, they had encountered something they wanted to understand rather than control. The galaxy was saved not through superior weapons or advanced technology, but through the simple refusal to accept that freedom was negotiable. In the aftermath, as the consciousness network slowly dissolved and beings throughout the galaxy returned to their individual awareness, the magnitude of what they had accomplished began to sink in. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Curiosity's Edge, looking out at stars that still shone with the chaotic light of freedom rather than the ordered glow of imposed perfection. Around her, representatives,